There are moments in television history that stop the world. Moments that happen so fast, so unexpectedly, that both the people living them and the millions watching at home can barely process what they're seeing before it's already over. This is one of those moments. What you're about to witness is not a scripted drama. It's not a carefully choreographed piece of reality television. It is the raw, unfiltered, painfully real story of what happened when one of the most beloved women in the history of Hollywood sat down for what she believed would be a friendly conversation and instead found herself in the crosshairs of a public humiliation she never saw coming. This is the story of the day Joy Behar pushed Julia Roberts too far. This is the story of how America's sweetheart revealed the steel beneath the smile. And this is the story of a breaking point that nobody in that studio, nobody watching at home, will ever forget. The morning began the way thousands of mornings before it had begun on the set of The View. Studio lights hummed to life, casting their familiar, warm golden glow across the iconic curved desk that had become one of the most recognizable pieces of furniture in American television. Crew members moved with practiced efficiency, adjusting camera angles by fractions of an inch, running final sound checks, straightening water glasses, smoothing the wrinkles from tablecloths, everything in its place, everything exactly as it should be. The audience filed in slowly at first, then in an eager, excited flood, clutching their programs, craning their necks to absorb every detail of a set they had seen so many times on their television screens but had never stood inside before. Conversations buzzed. Phones came out for photographs. There was that particular electricity that fills a room when something wonderful is expected, when people know they are about to witness something worth remembering. They had been told Julia Roberts was coming. Julia Roberts, Academy Award winner, box office legend, the woman whose smile had graced more magazine covers than perhaps any other actress alive, the woman whose laugh, that enormous, uninhibited, completely unself-conscious laugh, had become as famous as any sound effect in cinema. The woman the world had affectionately, instinctively, lovingly crowned America's sweetheart. The anticipation in that studio was electric. When Julia finally walked onto that set, the audience didn't just applaud, they erupted. They rose as one, a single spontaneous organism of joy and admiration, their applause crashing over the studio like a wave hitting shore. Julia moved through it the way she had moved through decades of adoration, with grace, with warmth, with that smile turned up to its fullest wattage, her signature red hair catching the studio lights, her emerald dress flowing as she waved and mouthed words of gratitude to the crowd. She was radiant. She was real. She was, in every conceivable way, exactly who the audience had hoped she would be. Whoopi Goldberg stood to greet her with open arms, her face lit with genuine delight. Sarah Haynes practically bounced in her seat with barely contained enthusiasm. Sunny Hostin nodded her appreciation with a particular warmth of someone who understood they were in the presence of genuine greatness. But Joy Behar sat differently. While the others radiated welcome, Joy leaned back in her chair and watched. Her smile was present, technically, but something about it didn't travel all the way to her eyes. There was a stillness to her, a calculating quality in the way her gaze tracked Julia's every movement, the way her fingers rested on the cards in her hand with quiet, deliberate patience. Those who knew Joy, who had worked beside her for years, who understood the particular language of her body, would have recognized that look immediately. It was the look of someone who had been waiting. The interview began beautifully, almost impossibly so. Whoopi welcomed Julia with the ease of two people who had shared this space before, their rapport effortless and warm. Julia spoke about her latest project with the kind of thoughtful intelligence that always surprised people who expected nothing more than surface glamour. She talked about her character's emotional journey, the collaborative relationship with her director, the particular challenge of finding truth in difficult scenes. The audience was riveted, not by celebrity spectacle, but by substance, by the genuine pleasure of watching someone who truly loves their craft talk about it with intelligence and passion. Sarah asked about her children, carefully, respectfully, and when Julia's face softened in response, when that famous smile became something smaller and more private and infinitely more real, the whole studio seemed to lean forward, grateful for the glimpse behind the curtain of an extraordinary life. Throughout all of it, Joy said almost nothing. She didn't interject with her trademark quips. She didn't fire off the sharp observations that were her specialty. She simply watched and waited and occasionally glanced down at the cards in her hand with that slight, private smile. The trap was being set. Nobody in that studio knew it yet. It happened in a pause between questions, the kind of natural conversational breath that in any other interview would have been filled with laughter or a commercial break. Joy leaned forward. You know, Julia, she said, her voice slicing cleanly through Sarah's half finished sentence, cutting off the warmth in the room like a hand over a candle. I've been watching your career for a very long time, and I have to ask you something. The temperature in that studio dropped several degrees in a single second. Sarah stopped mid word, her mouth still slightly open, surprise plain on her face. The audience, so animated just moments before, went suddenly completely still. There was something in Joy's voice, something beneath the professional tone, that registered instinctively in every person present as a warning. Julia turned to face her directly, that famous smile still in place, perhaps more cautious now, perhaps already sensing something she couldn't yet name. Of course, Joy, she said. Ask me anything. And Joy did. Don't you ever get tired of playing the same character over and over again? The question detonated in the air between them. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The audience processed it with the visible confusion of people who couldn't quite believe what they had just heard, as if their ears had registered the words but their brains were refusing to confirm. The mem, Julia's smile faltered. Just for a heartbeat, just long enough for every camera in that studio to catch it. I'm not sure I understand what you mean, she said carefully. I've always tried to take on a variety of roles throughout my career. Joy didn't relent. She leaned in. The pretty woman, she said. The romantic lead. The girl next door with the $1 million smile. Same thing, Julia. Different movie, same character. She paused, letting the words find their target, and then she went further. Don't you think your audiences deserve more than that? Don't you think they deserve something real from someone with your supposed talent? The word suppose landed like a slap across the face. Several audience members gasped out loud. Camera operators quietly shifted their positions, professional instincts recognizing that something significant was happening, that they needed to be ready, that this moment might matter. In the control room, above the studio floor, producers were almost certainly already on their feet, already arguing about what to do, already reaching for phones. Wilby tried to intervene. Julia has shown incredible range, she began carefully. Joy cut her off without even looking at her. I'm talking to Julia. Whoopee. I want to hear what she has to say. And there it was, the first clear signal of who was actually running this segment, who had decided how it would go, and what Joy's intention truly was. Julia sat up straighter. For the first time since settling into her seat, that famous smile had disappeared completely. When she spoke, her voice was measured, controlled. But underneath the control, something harder had appeared. I think my work speaks for itself, she said. Joy's response was a laugh, but not the warm human kind. It was sharp, cutting, the kind of sound that makes people in a room look at each other with wide eyes. Authenticity? Joy repeated, the word loaded with theatrical disbelief. Is that what we're calling it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks more like you've been playing the same version of yourself for 30 years. Julia Roberts, America's sweetheart in her natural habitat. What happened next crossed a line that nobody in that studio had expected to see crossed. Joy pivoted, suddenly, sharply, to the subject of privilege. She spoke about Julia's charmed life, about being born beautiful, discovered young, handed success before she was old enough to understand it. She asked with studied cruelty what Julia Roberts could possibly know about struggle, what she could know about the real world that everyone else actually lived in. The audience was dead silent. This was no longer uncomfortable television. This was something else, something that had a different name. Julia's hands, which had been resting easily in her lap just minutes before, were now gripping the armrests of her chair. The knuckles had gone white. Her breath was measured, deliberate, the breathing of someone consciously, actively working to stay calm. I think you're making some very unfair assumptions about my life, she said, her voice steady but with an edge that hadn't existed before. You don't know anything about the challenges I've faced or the obstacles I've overcome. Don't I? Joy fired back immediately. And she continued, Your biggest challenge has been choosing which mansion to live in, she said. Your hardest decision is probably which designer dress to wear to which premiere. She was emboldened now, leaning into Julia's visible hurt, the way a fighter leans into a corner. Whoopi stepped in more forcefully this time, her voice carrying the full weight of her authority as moderator. Okay, Joy, I really think we need to know Whoopi. Joy didn't even glance at her co-host. I think it's time someone asked the hard questions. I think it's time someone called out this perfect princess act for what it really is, a carefully constructed lie designed to sell movie tickets and magazine covers. The room seemed to compress around those words. Julia's face had gone pale, but when she spoke, her voice, despite everything, remained controlled. I have never pretended to be perfect, she said. I've been very open about my mistakes, my failures, my growth as a person and as an artist. And then Joy said the words that broke everything. She challenged whether Julia had ever truly been open at all. She accused her of feeding the public carefully sanitized, publicist-approved versions of herself. She asked with deliberate contempt when the last time was that anyone had seen the real Julia Roberts. She called her a product, a manufactured brand. She suggested that whoever the real Julia Roberts was, that person had gotten lost decades ago. And something in the studio shifted in that moment, irrevocably. You could feel it in the air. You could see it in the faces of the audience, the way smiles had been completely replaced by expressions of genuine distress. You could see it in the other hosts, Sunny's composure entirely shattered, Sarah's hand pressed to her mouth. Whoopi's jaw tight with the effort of managing something that was rapidly spinning beyond anyone's management. Julia stared at Joy for a long, charged moment, and then slowly, visibly, something gave way inside her. Not in defeat, in decision. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, but it filled the studio in a way that shouting never could. Strength, she said. She repeated the word, as if tasting it, testing it. You want to talk about strength, Joy? She paused, and when she continued, it was with an intensity that commanded every ear in the room. Strength is sitting here and listening to you systematically tear me down for no reason other than your own personal entertainment. Strength is not responding to your cruelty with cruelty of my own, even though every instinct in my body is screaming at me to fight back. Joy's eyes lit up. Oh, now we're getting somewhere, she said with what could only be described as genuine delight. There's that fire I knew was hiding underneath all that sweetness and light. This isn't an act, Julia said, her voice rising now despite everything. This is me trying to maintain some dignity and professionalism in the face of your completely unprovoked hostility. Joy waved her hand, dismissed it. Your personal relationships, she said. 3 marriages. Not exactly the fairy tale image you like to project, is it? The audience gasped. Not the nervous, uncertain gasps of earlier in the interview. These were genuine cries of shock, the sounds of people who could no longer pretend this was simply uncomfortable television, who recognized something uglier at work. Whoopi's mouth fell open. Joy, she said, that is completely inappropriate. That is way over the line. Julia's hands were trembling now, visibly, unmistakably, whether from anger, from grief, from the particular exhaustion of holding yourself together in front of millions of people while someone actively tries to dismantle you. It didn't matter. The trembling was there. The cameras saw it. Everyone saw it. My personal relationships, she said through gritted teeth, are exactly that, personal. They have nothing to do with why I'm here today, but Joy pressed. She always had everything to do with who you are, Joy insisted. They show the gap between the image and the reality. And then, with a hard, grating laugh that seemed to reverberate in the silent studio, she said it. She called Julia fragile. She suggested that if a few honest observations could hurt Julia's feelings, maybe she wasn't as strong as she pretended to be. A single tear escaped. It rolled down Julia Roberts' cheek in full high-definition view of every camera in the studio, in full view of every person at home on their couch, before she could stop it. The studio held its breath. And Julia Roberts made a choice. She reached for her microphone. Her fingers found the small clip that attached it to her emerald dress. She worked at it carefully, deliberately, each small movement deliberate, measured, and absolutely loaded with meaning. I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding here, she said, her voice beginning to shake despite everything. I came here today to talk about my work, to connect with your audience, to have a pleasant conversation. I didn't come here to be personally attacked. Oh, is that what this is? Joy said, leaning back with visible satisfaction. An attack? I thought this was just honest conversation. There's a difference between honesty and cruelty, Joy. The microphone was now free in Julia's hand. There's a very clear difference between asking tough questions and deliberately trying to hurt someone. She stood up. The sound of Julia Roberts' chair scraping against the studio floor was the loudest sound in the room. Every eye locked onto her as she rose. Tall, dignified, tears on her face, hurt in her eyes, and something else entirely in her posture. Something unbreakable. Joy's expression shifted in that moment. For the first time since the interview began, something crossed her face that wasn't calculated. A flicker of surprise. A flicker of something that looked almost like alarm. As if a part of her brain that had been operating on autopilot suddenly registered with cold clarity that she might have gone too far. Oh, come on, Julia. Don't be so dramatic. Sit down. This isn't a conversation, Julia said, each word precise and deliberate. This is a character assassination. This is you using your platform, your microphone, your audience, not to inform or entertain or inspire, but specifically to hurt. And I refuse to participate in it any longer. Whoopi stood up as well, her hands raised in desperate appeal. Julia, please, please don't leave. We can work this out. No, Whoopi. Julia's voice was gentle, but absolute. Some things can't be fixed with apologies or explanations. Some things are just wrong. She looked at Joy. And this is wrong. Joy tried to recover. She softened her voice, slightly, unconvincingly, and suggested that if she had hurt Julia's feelings, it truly hadn't been her intention, that she was simply trying to have a real, honest discussion. Julia looked at her for a long moment, and then she said the word. Bully. The word hit Joy like a physical impact. Her face flushed deep crimson. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. Her jaw worked silently for several seconds. I am not a bully, she said, her voice defensive, shaken in a way it hadn't been at any point before. I've been doing this job for years. I've interviewed hundreds of public figures. Nobody has ever called me a bully. Then maybe, Julia said, her voice steady as a stone, it's time someone told you the truth. She paused. Maybe it's time someone pointed out that there's a difference between being provocative and being cruel, between challenging your guests and trying to destroy them. The studio was in absolute suffocating silence. The camera operator stood frozen. The audience didn't move, didn't whisper, barely breathed. Everyone in that room understood they were inside a moment that would outlast the day, the week, the year. Joy, backed into a corner she had built entirely herself, erupted. She shouted about the cruelty of lying to millions of people, about the cruelty of selling a fantasy, about Julia pretending to be perfect, pretending to have answers, making struggling people feel worse about their own lives by displaying a happiness that wasn't real. And Julia finally, utterly, completely let herself speak. You're right about one thing, Joy. The sudden agreement stopped everyone. Joy opened her mouth. Julia held up a hand. Life is hard, Julia continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. Life is messy. Life is full of disappointment and pain and heartbreak. You're absolutely right about all of that. She paused. Let it land. But you know what else life is? The studio leaned in. Life is also beautiful. Life is full of moments of pure joy and love and wonder. Life is full of kindness and connection and hope. And if my work, if my so-called fake positivity helps even one person remember that, helps even one person get through a difficult day, then I am proud of what I do. I am proud of every single role I have ever played. Joy muttered something about naivety. Her voice had lost its edge. The fire was draining from it. What's naive? Julia replied, gathering her belongings with quiet finality, is thinking that tearing other people down makes you more authentic. What's naive is believing that cynicism is somehow more honest than hope. What's naive is thinking that cruelty is a substitute for truth. She walked toward the edge of the set, straight-backed, head high. Tears dried on her face, microphone clutched in one hand, purse in the other. Every camera followed her. "For what it's worth, Joy," she said. She paused at the edge. She didn't turn around. "I hope someday you figure out why you felt the need to do this. I hope you figure out what you were really trying to accomplish here." Another pause, quieter this time. "Because I don't think it was about me at all. Don't you walk away from me," Joy called after her. And for the first time in this entire devastating exchange, there was desperation in her voice, raw and unconcealed. "We're not finished here. You don't get to just leave." Julia turned back one final time. The cameras captured it in perfect clarity. The tears, the hurt, and behind all of it, the strength. The quiet, immovable, absolute strength of someone who has finally chosen herself. "Yes, Joy," she said simply. "We are finished. We are very, very much finished." And she walked off the set of The View. What was left behind was one of the most stunned silences in the history of live daytime television. Joy stood at the table, breathing heavily, her hands gripping its edge as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. The expression on her face moved through a sequence of emotions: anger, confusion, disbelief, and finally, slowly, something that looked like the first fragile stirrings of regret, cycling through her in the seconds after the most famous exit in talk show history. The audience sat completely still. No murmuring, no excited whispering, just the particular silence of people who have witnessed something they didn't expect and don't yet know how to hold. The other hosts looked shell-shocked. Whoopi's face showed the strain of someone trying to locate their professional footing on ground that had just fundamentally shifted beneath them. Sarah looked like she might cry. Sunny looked like she already had. Finally, after what felt like far more than the 15 or 20 seconds it actually was, Whoopi cleared her throat. She looked directly into the camera. Her voice, when it came, was missing every note of its usual warmth. "We're going to take a break," she said. "We'll be right back." But they wouldn't really be right back. Not in the way that phrase usually meant. Not in the way that promised a return to comfort, to normalcy, to the smooth and pleasant television experience the audience had arrived expecting. Something had broken in that studio. Something fundamental and irreparable about the relationship between a host and a guest, between a platform and the people it invited to trust it. The damage was done, and everyone in that room knew it. In the days and weeks that followed, the footage would be watched millions of times. People would analyze every frame of it. Joy's initial calm, Julia's growing distress, the moment the first tear fell, the moment Julia stood, the words she chose, the way she walked, the final look she gave before leaving. Some would praise Joy for asking the questions that nobody else dared to ask. Some would call it exactly what Julia called it: bullying, pure and simple, dressed up in the language of journalism. Most would find themselves somewhere in the complicated middle, where most honest reckonings about human behavior actually live. But beneath all the debate, beneath all the analysis and the hot takes and the think pieces and the split-screen clips on every entertainment news program in the country, one truth remained undeniable. Julia Roberts had been invited onto a show. She had arrived in good faith, prepared to be generous with her time, her stories, her presence. She had been warm. She had been professional. She had been exactly who the audience loved her for being. And she had been met with deliberate, systematic cruelty, and she had chosen not to accept it. Not with rage, not with retaliation, not with the kind of explosive, messy breakdown that makes for easy drama and easy judgment, but with something far more difficult to sustain and far more powerful to witness. With dignity, with the quiet, steel-spined refusal to let someone else's cruelty define her response, with the simple, revolutionary act of standing up, gathering her things, and walking out the door. There's something important in what happened on that set. Something that goes beyond celebrity drama, beyond talk show feuds, beyond the entertainment industry and its particular hunger for spectacle. It's the story of what happens when someone mistakes grace for weakness, when someone looks at a person whose natural mode is warmth and openness and kindness and decides that those qualities are evidence of fragility, of fakeness, of a performance waiting to be stripped away. Joy Behar spent the better part of an hour trying to find the crack in Julia Roberts' armor. What she found instead was that the armor and the person were the same thing, that the warmth was real, that the hope was genuine, that the smile, That famous, extraordinary smile that had been greeting the world for 30 plus years was not a mask. It was a choice, made every day. In the face of everything, the scrutiny, the criticism, the cameras, the years, the marriages, the miscarriages, the tabloids, the decades of people deciding what she meant and who she was and what she owed them. A choice to remain open, to remain kind, to keep believing, as Julia herself put it, that life is also beautiful. And on the day that someone finally pushed her past her limit, when someone finally succeeded in breaking through every professional courtesy and social grace and patient restraint she possessed, the real Julia Roberts didn't shout, didn't retaliate, didn't perform her pain for the cameras. She stood up, she held her head high, and she walked out with everything that mattered most to her fully, completely, absolutely intact. Her dignity, her truth, herself,